What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 11 Cash Game Review Show. I'm TJ Hernandez, your host, the director of DFS at 4for4.com. As always, with my co-host, Matt Savoca. Before we get into everything today, I want to tell you about the easiest, most fun way to spice up your football season. It's Underdog Fantasy and their brand new Pick'em game. Just pick the over or the under on your favorite or your least favorite player stats, and you could win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and mobile apps. Just pick between 2 and 5 players, and you could take home some cold, hard cash. Head to 4for4.com/underdog. Claim your free 4for4 Pro subscription and get $10 in bonus cash to play this weekend. Matt, hello, sir. Welcome to the Cash Review, the end of Week 11. How was your Week 11?
I think you said it well in that ad read. Cold, hard cash, because cash was cold and it was hard this week. It was
Yes.
it was a difficult sweat, and obviously there are some game flows that go haywire in the afternoon especially, but not the best week. We learn, we move on. It's all right.
Yeah, it was a crazy week on FanDuel. If anybody read your breakdown, they saw that the player pool was massive. You did a really good job of breaking it down and explaining that the pool was so massive just because the way your salary allocation went, you were really going to have like completely different builds. But still, there was just so many ways you could go on FanDuel. I mean, with the pricing already being relatively loose, when you get a couple good values like a Gallup, like a Wilson, it just opens everything up. It's what stud is going to hit, right? So whereas on DraftKings, somebody like Jonathan Taylor wasn't even in play. Like nobody played Jonathan Taylor in cash on DraftKings. Like I don't even think I saw a lineup with him in the big double up with over 1,000 people. On FanDuel, you could get to him. I mean, he still wasn't popular, but it's just such a different animal on FanDuel when things open up like that. So how did things look once that opened up for you?
Yeah, so basically, you're exactly right. What FanDuel allowed you to do is get two studs. One at the running back position is what most people chose, and one at the top wide receiver position.
Yeah.
Now, our value rankings were pointing us to some really clear options here. And I did go a little bit rogue, if you will. I just thought that Nick Chubb against the Lions, which was such a smash spot. And honestly, the schedule adjusted fantasy points looked great. The line looked great, and he looked good. He had over 20 fantasy points, just when somebody that the rest of the field could easily get to if they weren't picking Chubb, going off for 30 points more is going to destroy you some weeks. And also, we can put that lineup on there as well. We can, kind of look at the decision points too, and I don't think there was anything certainly egregious about the game stacking of Kansas City Dallas. Massively high total. If there's one area where I was kind of waffling back and forth, it's the Jeff Wilson and Deebo Samuel against the Jacksonville Jaguars situation. Now, we knew that game flow was going to be fine, and honestly, the Jaguars offense does great. Brandon Ayuk obviously has like a 38% target share, and so that changes things, but Wilson drops a touchdown. I don't even hate going to those two players, especially when our value ranking pointed to Deebo as a clear top option at the wide receiver position. It's just one of those weeks where the lineup seems to work out okay, except for the highest raw scoring position, quarterback, and the fact that so many value options at the quarterback position eventually go off. And then, of course, Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, Taylor's one thing, big underdog against the best defense in the league. So, I mean, I understand why people are going to play a sub $9,000 back on a slate where you can afford to get to him, where you have A.J. Dillon, Jeff Wilson, even Mark Ingram. I think some people might have played Mark Ingram on FanDuel. So you can get up to Dalvin, Jonathan Taylor. We had them ranked relatively high, but I mean, it's far from egregious to not play them. And we had Chubb valued basically the same as Taylor on 4for4. I'm looking at it right now. He's only $200 more than Taylor. Cleveland was huge favorites. Detroit's 30th in AFPA, scheduled just fantasy points allowed to running backs. And I talked about it late on Saturday night. The Browns had the third highest implied point total on the slate, and nobody was playing them. I mean, that was kind of like a GPP discussion, but playing the Browns or Nick Chubb makes a ton of sense, especially with Kareem Hunt still on IR. Like I know that Dearness Johnson has played well, but I mean, look, Chubb still puts up 21 points. Like that's a good play.
Right.
And then the 49ers and Debo thing, I think you kind of that's one of those spots where you just play the values together. Like even though you stack them, you stack the Chiefs. I mean, these are value plays, right? We're not necessarily like even going out of our way to stack that game. We had all these guys rated very high in value.
Yeah, and it just the ball bounces that way sometimes, and even Michael Gallup, who ends up with under 7 fantasy points, ends up with a 24% target share from a
Yeah.
5,400 salary player. We're gonna take that every single time. If you told me Gallup was gonna have a 25 or so percent target share, I'd be playing in 100% of lineups. If I went back this past weekend. The Eagles defense was something I kind of went to later in the weekend.
Yeah.
We did have some options open up in that 35 3600 range in the defense. So that was sort of a play where I didn't have to go there. And especially because I had a couple hundred left over in salary, getting from Debo to Justin Jefferson with this lineup construction was quite simple, and I ran into some Justin Jefferson in cash. I don't think it was the best play, but people were willing to game stack AJ Dillon, Devontae Adams, and Justin Jefferson because it was possible on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think in like on FanDuel where you're chasing touchdowns, I think a play like a Justin Jefferson, he's always going to be in play. Gallup and Wilson, I mean, FanDuel doesn't let us export full contest CSVs, but the even though they completely whiff, I'm assuming that their ownership in like large field double ups is probably similar to what we saw in DraftKings. I'm sure Wilson, especially on FanDuel, I'm sure Wilson was like 80%. He was so cheap, and then Gallup was a crazy value too. Like you didn't need to get down to Gallup, but I think probably everybody played him as well. So even though they whiff, they don't hurt you when they whiff. Like you're just not even worried about that. You're just locking those players in. Are there any other before I ask you a couple questions, any other like decision points that really stood out to you when you were building this?
I guess I did split some of my cash play when I was at the same PMR as my opponent and I was losing. Basically, the expectation was I thought I was going to see a ton of Mahomes and Kelsey. And I don't know if it was randomness or, people were just seeing different things from the sites that they were following. But I didn't end up seeing a whole lot of Mahomes and Kelsey. And obviously that was the play. That game goes well under its total. And so switching from Mahomes and Kelsey to Dak and Schultz and a better wide receiver in that Las Vegas Cincinnati game was mostly not fruitful. But as we say before, those lineups are probably going to lose anyway. So it's no skin off my back that, some of the late swap doesn't work. I still stuck with this main lineup. Obviously Mahomes really burns you. Just to answer your question from before, TJ, in the big double up with 25,200 people, AJ Dillon was 89.7% owned. Jeff Wilson 89.0.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, those guys, like, again, we've talked about this before. Like, we don't talk about ownership a ton in cash games, but when we know somebody is going to be that popular, like, you just take the overlap and hope. Like, there's no point in, like, to do a complete fade of players like that in cash. It just doesn't even make sense. Like, the only thing you're ever doing with those type of plays is if they are in late windows, late swapping, if your team craps the bed, but both of those guys were early, so it didn't even matter. One thing that I think that I'm interested in is, did you have any? But actually, before I get to that, you talked about the late swap. I mean, in cash games this week, and I talked about late swap a lot this week. I thought it was one of the most important weeks for late swap. In cash games, though, it was really tough to navigate late swaps because if you were anywhere close to the cash line and you have multiple players, it's unless you're completely whiffing on your lineups, it's hard to justify like mass swapping because there's so many guys in your lineup. Even if they're owned, like 3 guys can still get you over the hump even if they're popular. So it's actually a really tough week to swap in cash games. If you're in GPPs and your team is doing horrible, it's super easy just to mass swap off of the Chiefs Cowboys game. But in cash, I think it's pretty tough. Did you consider one of the biggest values for me on FanDuel was AJ Brown, and obviously he didn't get there. He was on and off the field with injury. But did you ever consider him in your lineups?
Yeah, he was in a lineup at noon on Sunday. So he
Okay.
was very, very close to making it. And if you look at our final run of value rankings compared to salary based expectations, you
Mm-hmm.
probably end up with a lineup that looks something like Ingram, Dillon, Wilson,
Mm-hmm.
Samuel, Brown, and then pick your quarterback that you want, and pair up the tight end situation with them. So I definitely saw that as one of the chalk builds. I really liked T. Higgins though. I wanted some
Yeah.
connection to that Cincinnati Las Vegas game. And one thing that really didn't happen, I wasn't losing so badly in any matchup where I felt like, okay, I need to get off that Dallas KC game entirely. And
Yeah.
ultimately, some of
Exactly.
those stacks in that, or going to Joe Mixon, ended up working out great. That game got closer to its total than any other in the afternoon.
Yeah, T was down at 65. I'm looking right now. He was our, besides Michael Gallup, he was our top value below $7,000 by a wide margin. I mean, everyone else above him was like AJ Brown at 72. Everyone else was 75 or above. So I think not playing T probably would have been pretty bad. Were you ever really even considering, like you talked about Ingram, if you did have an AJ Brown lineup, did you even consider Ingram? Because to me, with so many values at running back this week, Ingram was like the bottom of that list for me. Then I actually like that. I don't know if this was if you did this on purpose, but I actually like the idea, even in cash. I know we never talk about leveraging cash, but if you're not going to play Ingram, I actually like the Eagles play, because if you are playing a lot of head to heads, that will let you kind of jump a lot of lineups that you do have head to heads against when they have Ingram and you have the Eagles defense. So is that like on purpose? And were you like, what did you think about Ingram as a play?
So I didn't mind Ingram as a value play. He just wasn't as strong of a value as last week, and so he didn't feel like someone I had to get to.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I started getting closer to this build sort of had 300 to 500 to play with, and so there were some defenses that had a higher value ranking that actually had a lower salary. But then I started to look
Mm-hmm.
into this Eagles Saints matchup, and I saw that they were home favorites.
Yep.
I saw that the Saints really don't have playmakers whatsoever, and I almost got to the point where I was going to play Hurts and the Eagles defense. I'm not sure that's a cash game play, but I just saw
I
them,
think it's fine.
especially the way that they've been leaning towards the run.
Yeah.
That was a game that they could control start to finish. Obviously, you get another defensive score from them. That's lucky. What is unlucky is that some of the value defenses below them end up just hitting for more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Hurts and Eagles probably fine in cash. I mean, when we have Mahomes available, I think I like your play better. I actually love this cash lineup, even though it doesn't hit. I actually think this is like, I don't know if I can get off of this, but if you could have got off anything or changed anything, what stands out to you?
I don't think T was a must play
Uh-huh.
in the sense that we've seen huge target share, and the salary wasn't as egregious on FanDuel as it was
Right.
on DraftKings in the difference. So I just saw him as a value option. Maybe it was a little biased seeing him in the breakout receiver model, things like that. But if there was any play that didn't feel like it had to be in this lineup, it was probably T. Higgins.
Yeah, I have a few more thoughts on T when we get to DraftKings. Obviously, we talked about Jonathan Taylor hits in winning lineups. Anything else besides Taylor and Jefferson that you saw in lineups that were not, obviously not like egregious or like outliers, but smart cash game builds that people hit on?
Yeah, I saw some fade AJ Dillon, Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams stacks that seem pretty solid off the
Yeah.
bat, and then even some that game stacked uh, Justin Jefferson with that. So those lineups obviously are absolutely crushing. Cam Newton was in a bunch of cash game lineups. Jalen Hurts was in a bunch of cash game lineups, and there were some people in head to heads who were getting kind of off the wall. You see a lot more variance in head to heads than you do in just these double ups and 50-50s. But I did run into some Trevor Simeons, some Colt McCoys, some Joe Flacco's. Like good on you. It just wasn't on my radar. Um, and you know, some things that I did see some Elijah Moore. He was
Yeah.
at five.
Hmm.
He was 5,900 compared to Gallup's 5,400. Rashad Bateman's 5,800. I bet a lot of people had Bateman at just $100 less and were able to pivot off there. I didn't love that play,
Yeah.
but I get it.
I wonder how many of like those Bateman lineups are people that set on Saturday before Lamar news and just never even changed. I mean, I don't, especially when you're chasing touchdowns on FanDuel. I don't know how you. I know it opens up salary, and I do like an Elijah Moore or a punt quarterback. I don't know if I like punt quarterback on FanDuel, but I do know like the punt to get to a stud. I think you can always justify it. It's in some sense because that combo is just always going to be better than a couple middle lane players. Um, People that played Aaron Rodgers in cash, I mean, I just don't know if that's like what I'm trying like getting off of AJ Dillon to play the obviously it worked yesterday, but I mean that's a GPP play. Like, congrats to the people that it hit. And I saw it at the top of DraftKings lineups. I mean, obviously those are the outlier scores, but I see some people do that too. And it's not like he was, especially on FanDuel. I mean, he's priced at 7,700, so you get up to Patrick Mahomes for $600 more. 600 is a lot, but I mean,
Hurts is
I
there
just
too, right?
yeah, Hertz is right there. I just don't. It just seems like a weird cash game play to me. Um, but yeah, any last thoughts on FanDuel?
Yeah, I think this is one of those where I don't have any major changes to the process. Sometimes
Yeah.
players hit more than your players hit.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, I do still think this is like the this is probably the cash game build. I mean, I guess like Chubb and Eagles defense are really the only coin flips. Oh, actually, did you ever think about paying down for tight end?
Not really.
Yeah, no, no.
I mean, I had built in sort of a filter that only beyond Kittle, every single tight end was part of a game stack, and none of the other game
Yeah,
environments were super appealing.
yeah. I mean, when you have Gallup, Wilson, AJ, I don't really know how you don't pay for Kelsey. So I think I agree with you too. Let's move on over to DraftKings. We could put that lineup up, and I don't really have a ton to say about my my builds this week. I did well, 61st percentile. I mean, the 114 obviously isn't smashing, but this was probably one of the most duped lineups in double ups on DraftKings. Again, I said 61st percentile, so it's still cashed fairly comfortably. There was a point before Schultz on the last drive where I only have 3 players in double digits, and it's still cashing comfortably. So that's just kind of the week it was. I didn't have a lot of like thinking to do in cash. Everybody in this lineup, except for Mahomes and Schultz, was basically a a lock for me. AJ Dillon was a lock. I mean, at his salary. Once we get news on Elijah Mitchell being out, Jeff Wilson's a lock. Um, I was pretty comfortable playing Devontae over Tyreek. We had him valued over him most of the week, and I think the discrepancy is still pretty big between them. I know the game environment was supposed to be different, but Devontae just sees so much of their target share. Where I mean, I know Tyreek has been getting a lot of volume, but we've seen Kansas City, the ebb and flow of their offense. We know Kelsey could get involved. I just didn't think it was that close. Gallup was obviously a lock once Amari's out. T. Higgins was way underpriced for the usage he's been having. He was down at 5,400, and we see the ownerships on these guys. T at 50%, AJ Dillon at over 80%, Wilson at 75%, the Browns defense at 50%. If these guys whiff, and they did, I'm not. Well, I mean, they don't whiff. Like Dylan gets to 15 and Ingram gets 16, but I'm just not losing any value on those plays.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes kind of a 4v4 game, which
Yeah.
can be kind of fun. I mean, it's higher stakes for those 4 players, but yeah, when you see the ownership approaching 50% or more for that many players, it gets, the game theory gets very different, especially when you're
Mhm.
looking at all your head to heads in that case. But yeah, I think on DraftKings he kind of walked into this structure this week.
Yeah, and I have a couple more thoughts on like the 4v4, 2v2 type idea, and I think I'm kind of like came full circle and actually liking it more, but we'll talk about that shortly. um, the decision points that I had, I mean, I early in the week I wrote up Cam and said he was the only cash gameplay, and I did very much believe that. When we got news that Amari was out, when we got news that Elijah Mitchell was out, and then before we found out Lamar was out, when we got news that Marquise was out, and Bateman would have been the lock for me. I didn't feel like we needed to go down to Cam with Mahomes available. And then we got news that PJ Walker might be getting rotated in. So then I was like, it doesn't even make sense to take that risk. I mean, obviously Cam gets there, but he was only in 4% of double up lineups. So I think a lot of people were on that same train of thought. It wasn't a horrible play. I just didn't think it was necessary with so many values. And I wrote that up. I added that to the article. I added it in Discord. So I think all of our subscribers were pretty much on board. I basically told everybody in Discord, like, just play the 3 value running backs and Michael Gallup, and then just let the chips fall the rest of the way. Any thoughts on Cam on DraftKings? Actually, and I kind of actually thought about Huntley, like briefly. I didn't suggest him, but I was like, he is so cheap that he does open things up. But then it went back to the same thought process with Cam. There were so many other cheap players that I was like, I should just play Mahomes because he was underpriced anyway.
Yeah, he's underpriced, and I'm looking at Jalen Hurts at 7,700. Like, you probably have the salary to get up there, and no one else in that upper tier is really in a smash spot. So we obviously were looking both at Mahomes. I was for basically most of the week.
Yeah.
Cam obviously hits. Hurts obviously was the one that I feel like if this were 4 weeks ago, we probably were playing Hurts in this spot, which is annoying.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. He was never really on my radar, and he probably should be in our player pool every single week. Just because he is like, he probably has the highest floor of any quarterback right now.
And he's getting to that Josh Allen red zone usage too, where you just can't ignore it.
Yeah, I think he's probably, unless his price gets up egregious, I think he's probably should be on our radar every week. Going on to like my big decision points. I mean, again, like I said, for once we got all the news in, for me, it was really only Mahomes and Dalton Schultz is what I wasn't sure about. I think maybe in retrospect, Jordan Vanek, our GPP maven, always talks about the Z scores, and like the difference between Kelsey and the field was so much higher than any other position this week. Everyone else was kind of clustered together, every other position except for I think maybe the Browns, but I don't think we Z score the Browns. But obviously Kelsey didn't smash. I think he got like 19 DK points or something, but I think the process of prioritizing him might have made more sense, even though I don't typically pay up for tight end on DraftKings and cash games. I think this week it made sense. I think he was only 7,100, which is pretty affordable. Outside of that, I mean, we talked about maybe considering Hurts, which I just didn't even do. I think one thing that I really should have thought about with when I said all these values open up, and I didn't want to play Cam because of that, and it was easy to get to Mahomes. I think besides Kelsey, I maybe should consider CMC in my build. I didn't think I needed to get to him because I didn't think he was going to be like super popular. But when you have all these values and you have a sub 9K CMC with the workload we know he gets, I think, and I wrote him up too, but just when I started building, it just never really like was it like a high priority for me. And I think probably CMC that cheap should always kind of be prioritized.
I was worried the most about Christian McCaffrey going into the 1 p.m. game Sunday because it just felt like we were overlooking the possibility that he was going to be his normal self. And it certainly looks like going forward, that's the way it's going to be. And I wonder in cash games, I don't have any data to back this up. I do wonder when there's this many value options, particularly in the way that it was this week, where it's really 3 value running backs and a value wide receiver. That should just be an automatic go, play your top running back raw projection option. And honestly, that was my thinking with Nick Chubb. But honestly, with a healthy CMC, why isn't it him every week? That's a valid argument.
Yeah, I don't know if Wilson would have been the odd man out if I get to CMC, but I did kind of have a read that Wilson might bust just because Kittle was back. I thought the Niners might throw a little bit more than they had with Kittle and Debo and Ayuk all kind of coming on, and
Yeah.
Garoppolo. I think Garoppolo does end up throwing 3 touchdowns, and Debo was getting involved in the rush game 2 weeks ago, and then I believe he got a rushing touchdown yesterday. So all of those things, like from a like raw, if I was making projections, which I don't, or rankings, I probably would have been way under the consensus on Wilson. But obviously, I've just kind of been like these guys that are going to be over 60%, like just play them, and if they whiff, they whiff. They don't hurt you. But I do think that like I did feel pretty strongly about that, and just was figured he's going to be in this many lineups like he was. But if I do prioritize CMC, I think Wilson probably ends up being the odd man out for me.
I get that, but I also see it as like, if you had told me on Friday that San Francisco is going to win 30-10,
Right. Yeah.
I'm probably just playing Jeff Wilson
Yeah.
100% of the time, especially at his FanDuel salary. What is he on? No, he was the exact same on DraftKings. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I get
I
what you're
think,
saying, but
yeah. I think fading him
he's
in
got
cash
enough.
would have been. I think fading him in cash would have been very egregious. And even though he didn't work out, I think I probably still end up playing him. But I did like I did take that read, and I had no Jeff Wilson in any high stakes stuff. So that obviously worked out for me. It's very easily goes the other way, but I guess even if you do, I think maybe the bigger point is even if you do have those reads, like this is what kind of separates the men from the boys in cash, that it's actually probably right to make the cash game play, even if you do have that kind of read. And I think people really do just get in their own head, and they don't play these plays, and then they lose. And we have these kind of heuristics around cash games, and Jeff Wilson fills all of those. So whatever you think about projections or matchups, it's probably better to follow those cash game heuristics.
Yeah, and this is where that concept of layering that we were talking about in the game theory segment, I think becomes so important, right? Because you put
Yeah.
your cash game lineup that has the quote unquote correct plays into these 3x and 5x. And then if you're constructing single entry or three entry
Yeah. Yeah.
lineups that have great leverage, like they're getting off of Debo Samuel and they're going to Justin Jefferson, they're getting off of Jeff Wilson
Right.
and George Kittle and they're going to Brandon Ayuk, and then they go into those 3x and 5x tournaments. Guess what? One of those hits and you're happy, even though you essentially just hedged with two lineups.
Yeah, and that's really probably way more important than my read on it. Like if Wilson in the early window whiffs at 75% ownership, you can pretty confidently like get off of a Gallup or a Mahomes in the late slate if your lineup is doing horrible. I didn't have to do any late swaps because obviously Devontae gets there for me, and AJ Dillon and Mark Ingram are doing enough from like my lineups are already kind of comfortably cashing because everybody had such bad lineups that I didn't have to think about it. Anything stand out to you just from a broad overview perspective?
Um, Not really.
Yeah.
I think we brought up those big points, which is just like, sometimes the right way doesn't get there, but that doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily we change our process. We just build tournament lineups that are contrarian so that
Mhm.
when the right way doesn't hit, we also benefit.
Yes, I think anybody that has been following us all season should have a very dialed process. This is probably the most comfortable I've been in cash in probably a few years. And I think a lot of it has to do with us doing this review, and really drilling down the process. So hopefully people are coming along with us. I mean, from an NFL perspective, a few things stood out to me yesterday. Joe Flacco somehow unlocks Elijah Moore, and I think that actually might be a thing. So we'll have to keep a tab on what the quarterback situation is in New York. But I don't think the Elijah Moore game was necessarily an aberration. We saw briefly 2 weeks ago when Flacco came in that him and Elijah Moore had a little bit of a connection, and then yesterday, obviously, a huge connection. I wasn't surprised that the Bills struggled on offense without Spencer Brown. I am surprised that their defense gets completely gashed. I do think that's an aberration. I still think that the Bills are the best team in the AFC. They've really been a different team without their fully healthy offensive line, and I don't think that can go overlooked. I think when they're probably going to be without Brown on Thursday because his COVID. He got the COVID test so late in the week, and they have such quick turnaround. So even if they struggle against the Saints, I still do think they're the best team in the AFC. I don't know how important that is for DFS, but I think maybe we'll have some ownership opportunities if they struggle again on Thursday. The Cowboys, obviously Gallup really struggles. Jordan Vanek talked about this a lot in his write-ups this week, that without Cooper, and I didn't even really think about it much when I was building, I just thought it just meant we play Gallup, but without Cooper, all of the roles are really limited for the Cowboys. Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb can both move around the formation a lot. CD can still do it. The problem is the other guys can't. Cedric Wilson and Michael Gallup aren't super versatile. So without that versatility of Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, I think that really explains a lot of the Cowboys' struggles yesterday. They were just very limited in how they can move their players around. Then obviously CD gets hurt, so that just compounds the idea. So I think that is something to think about going into Thursday if you're playing the Thanksgiving slate. If Cooper's still out and CD's still playing, I think they can really struggle again because of that. And then in the notes I wrote, Ezekiel Elliott runs like Rich Eisen. I mean, they're just him and Tony Pollard are like night and day. I think I hate doing like the talent evaluation thing because that's not what I do, and I do try to follow the metrics for DFS, but I think I might be out on Zeke as a GPP unless his price completely plummets. I don't know if Zeke is really usable in DFS anymore.
That sucks, but I got to agree with you. And that knee is clearly bothering him. I think he said so much in the post-game news presser. That really surprised me. Honestly, Cincinnati is a team that looks like in some weeks it's going to be able to turn on the Jets in a way that I didn't really know that they were going to be able to do. That really surprised me. And Las Vegas, I mean, they're finally getting exposed as the fraudulent team that I kind of thought they were.
On our Friday show, I said this is the time where the Raiders start falling apart.
It is a bit of a perennial joke at this point. Yeah. And I will say that without CeeDee Lamb likely in the lineup and no Amari Cooper for Dallas in that game against Las Vegas, I don't know if I'm going to be betting many overs in that game. I just think that there's a possibility for offensive struggles there. And the one thing I do want to say in the individual metrics, other than Jonathan Taylor obviously breaks the slate with his score, Darnell Mooney, by far the largest target share, 48.4% target share with no Allen Robinson. I know obviously it's no Justin Fields for part of that game, but he's the only player over 40%. The only player over 35% is Brandon Ayuk. So maybe we finally get that second half breakout for Ayuk going forward too.
Yeah, I think is it the Bears on Thursday? Is it Bears Lions on Thursday?
I thought so. Lions?
Okay. Yeah, so I think
Bears,
people
Lions,
I don't know what Justin Fields status is at this point. I think some people might look, and we'll get into the analysis obviously later in the week. I think people are going to look at Darnell Mooney's targets, say, sure, he saw 16 targets, but 11 of them came from Andy Dalton. So how much can you put into it? 5 of Justin Fields' 11 targets went to Darnell Mooney for a 45% target share. So I don't think it was a Dalton thing. I think it's just Mooney might be their best receiver at this point. Any just general approach notes on the week? I mean, I think we covered it pretty well, but anything to note on your process?
The only thing I will say is that I might want to do a little bit of work, and my data nerdy process, I'll try to build it out, but I think I might want to change the way I view value rankings for late inactives just a little bit, of a tweak where sometimes we certainly update our projections really, really fast on Sunday mornings, and that obviously affects the value rankings, but I think I need to make sure that I'm comparing our value rankings, which of course incorporate projection, opponent, Vegas lines, all those things that are moving all the time. But I just want to make sure that it's on par with things like consensus projection or ownership, so that I know that I'm moving with the field.
Yeah.
Or that I know I'm specifically going against the field because our value projections say so.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me, I have long had a really big problem with cash games having a lot of overlap in them, and it does increase the variance, obviously, because if you're gonna have a lot of 2v2 or 3v3 lineups, that can be frustrating when you're on the wrong side of it. Um, I've kind of come to the other side of it where I am just going to, if those bad weeks happen, they happen. But cash games for me, at least on DraftKings, have just kind of turned into this let other people shoot themselves in the foot. Like stop trying to overthink it, and just embracing the volatility of like these 2v2, 3v3 weeks, and just let people make egregious lineups. And like I said yesterday, all of these players bust in my cash lineup. I only score 114 points or whatever and still comfortably cash. And it's because so many people are just bad at understanding concepts, at trusting core concepts of cash, at thinking they know what players are good at football, at thinking they're good at projections. We're all horrible at projections. So just be like everybody is, right? Even like Paulson's the best in the industry and it's like a 65% hit rate or something. It's just super hard to do. It's really hard to be to project NFL players on a weekly basis. So on DraftKings, let people make these mistakes and we could profit. If you go back and look at, and this isn't even to be like braggadocious or whatever, but like look at my lineups, they're consistently been in this like 60 to 70th percentile this year. I'm having a great cash year, and I'm not like, it's because I'm not overthinking it. I've just really been laying into these core concepts, and people like I saw there's lineups that finish ahead of me with like CMC, David Montgomery, none of the value running backs. They flexed Adam Troutman or something. These are cash lineups that people are putting out. Like it's let people make.
I ran into
mistakes.
a ton of Troutman.
Yeah,
what?
Yeah,
I have no idea.
Let people make mistakes. Like I actually think cash games are like the information out there, and there maybe we get to a point where a percentage of the field over is more than is beatable. If it gets to the point where that many people are duping lineups, then yes. But as of now, people are still just making horrible mistakes in cash games. Any last thoughts on the week before we move on to our double Thanksgiving week, 2 full slates this week?
Yeah, just remember that based on what we just said, those rules right there, in the short term, those wild lineups can win sometimes. Over the long term, we know we can beat them with good process.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, on to Turkey Week, where we have a double slate this week. So, again, if you are a 4for4 subscriber, things will be a little bit different this week. We'll have a full slate of content on Wednesday for the Thanksgiving Day slate, for the full slate, for the showdowns. No DFS MVP for the Thanksgiving slate, but again, plenty of content on the site. We'll have full ownership projections. Everything that we have for main slate will be ready for Thanksgiving slate. Everything else getting pushed to Saturday to give everybody a day to travel to enjoy the holiday, including DFS MVP, which will be pushed to 12 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. So we won't be here Friday. Please like us here on YouTube. Please follow the 4for4 channel on YouTube. Please subscribe to the DFS MVP podcast on any podcast platform that you subscribe to. Again, this week, I have to check with the Yahoo schedule. I think we're probably dropping normal time for Yahoo, but just be subscribed for the Yahoo DFS. It'll hit your feeds, whether it's on the Yahoo podcast feed or the DFS feed. That will be out Friday or Saturday. I have to double check on that. Sunday morning, GPP last look, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Join in the description. I might be rolling solo on that because Jordan's going to the Dolphins game. So, but we will have that this week. So just a crazy week with Thanksgiving. Safe travels, everybody. Enjoy the holiday. Follow us on Twitter. There, look at Rich Eisen with the turkey.
Look at that, Sal.
Just the fastest Photoshop-ish paint. I don't know what clip art you've ever seen in your life. Follow us on Twitter.
Whatever it is, it's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Follow us on Twitter. 4for4 is at 4for4 football. Matt's a Draftaholic. I'm at TJ Hernandez. We'll talk to you guys on Saturday, not Friday.